My wife, Lisa, has recently expressed a desire to open our marriage for her captivating coworker, and I find myself at a loss for how to protect what we have built together. Lisa, who is 34, and I, at 36, have been married for 8 years. I always believed we had a solid relationship, no marriage is without its challenges, but I thought we could navigate them together. For context, I stand at 5 feet 6 inches, while Lisa is 5 feet 5 inches. My height has always been a sensitive issue for me, not that I dwell on it, but the occasional comment from others can sting. However, Lisa has always made me feel secure about it. She used to call me her perfect match because of our similar heights, a small gesture that made me feel truly loved for who I am. Then came Ryan. He is her new coworker, standing tall at 6 feet 4 inches, strikingly handsome, and the kind of guy you'd expect to see on the cover of a fitness magazine. He's charming, funny, and seems to know just what to say. At first, I brushed it off. She would mention him occasionally, like, "Ryan said the funniest thing at work today," or "Ryan is so good at solving these problems." I assumed it was just typical office banter. Everyone has that one coworker they connect with, right? But then things began to shift. Lisa started mentioning him more often, and there was a tone in her voice that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't exactly gushing, but it was certainly more than indifference. I caught her smiling at her phone, claiming it was just a funny meme Ryan shared in the group chat. She also began dressing differently, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. She bought a new perfume, saying she just wanted to change things up. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Then came the moment that changed everything. One night, as we sat on the couch sharing a bottle of wine, she seemed a bit tipsy but not drunk. Suddenly, she said, "I need to be honest with you. I find Ryan quite appealing. I can't stop thinking about him, but don't worry, I haven't acted on it." I was frozen, unsure of how to respond. Before I could process her words, she continued, "I think we should consider opening our marriage so I can explore these feelings. It might even bring us closer." My mind went blank. I told her outright that I wasn't comfortable with it. I never signed up for an open marriage, and the thought of her with someone else, especially Ryan, made me feel sick. She quickly became defensive, saying, "You're being insecure. You're letting your height issues cloud your judgment. This isn't about you, it's about me discovering my true self." She framed it as if I was blocking her from a significant journey of self-discovery. I felt like the villain for not wanting to see my wife with another man. She urged me to be supportive, claiming this could be an opportunity for us to grow as a couple. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The woman I had been with for nearly a decade was asking for permission to explore a relationship outside of ours. I didn't know whether to cry or scream, I just sat there, numb. Since that night, the atmosphere between us has been tense. Lisa has stopped mentioning Ryan altogether, but it feels forced, as if she's trying to avoid the topic. The tension is suffocating. I can't look at her without replaying our conversation in my mind. I keep wondering if she's already infatuated with him, what's stopping her from acting on it anyway. Everything irritates me these days. If she laughs at her phone, I worry it's a message from him. If she comes home late, I can't help but wonder where she's been. I hate feeling this way. It's as if an enormous invisible wall has risen between us, and I have no idea how to break it down. Part of me questions whether I'm being unreasonable. Maybe this is just how modern relationships work, and I'm too old-fashioned to understand. But the louder part of me feels betrayed. How can I compete with someone like Ryan? The fact that she even wants this makes me feel inadequate, as if I've already lost without realizing I was in a fight. I've been losing sleep, replaying our conversation, trying to figure out what comes next. I love her and don't want to lose her, but I can't fathom sharing her with anyone else. I feel trapped and unsure of what to do. Someone once told me, "You've already lost her, not because you did anything wrong, but because she lacks the maturity to resist temptation." That resonated with me. When you find yourself attracted to someone else while in a relationship, the best course of action is to step back. Jake remained locked in a stubborn mindset, as if admitting there could be a problem on his side was impossible or shameful. As he continued to refuse testing, I began to feel increasingly inadequate, even though the doctors had assured me that everything was normal. His actions made me feel as if I was somehow to blame for our struggles. Meanwhile, Jake's parents persisted with their intrusive questions and comments every time we visited them. The topic of grandchildren dominated every conversation, and it got to the point where I dreaded family gatherings, knowing they would only talk about their hopes for grandchildren. No matter how many times I tried to explain that these things take time or that we were working on it, his mother would give me a condescending look, as if she were disappointed in me. Then, they began making direct statements about how they hoped I wasn't the problem. At one family gathering, surrounded by a slew of Jake's distant relatives, his mother bluntly informed me, in a loud voice and with a feigned worried expression, that she hoped I wasn't damaged. I felt utterly humiliated. Jake said nothing, he just sat there awkwardly, laughing it off as if it were no big deal. That hurt more than anything. I believed he should have defended me, but instead, he allowed his parents to humiliate me. When I tried to talk to him about it later, he dismissed my feelings, saying it was just his mother's sense of humor. A few months later, we had another family meal, and Jake's mother chose that moment to make another harsh remark. This time, she didn't hold back. She went into hysterics, wailing about how old she was getting and how I was ruining her dreams of having grandchildren. She then started screaming in my face, calling me a broken woman and a disgrace to womanhood. I was horrified. I did everything I could to keep myself from saying something rude. I knew she enjoyed humiliating me in front of her family, but this was beyond uncalled for. I looked around to see if anyone would say something, but everyone just kept staring down at their plates. The only response came from Jake's father, who nodded in agreement with his wife. Jake, like the rest of his family, simply gazed at his plate, pretending nothing was happening. That was my breaking point. I couldn't believe that despite everything I had gone through while trying to figure out why we couldn't conceive, Jake refused to defend me. Seeing him sit there passively, without even looking at me, made me realize where our marriage stood. That night, when we arrived home, I packed my bags and informed Jake that I was leaving. He hardly reacted, he didn't seem to care that I was done. He was so accustomed to his parents being the focus that he had no idea he had lost me. That only fueled my anger. How difficult is it to stand up for someone you claim to love? I left that day and never looked back. Leaving was not an easy decision, but it was the best one I've ever made. After I left, I moved in with a friend for a few months while I planned my next steps. I filed for divorce, and the process went fairly smoothly. Jake didn't fight it, and we ended things peacefully. Once the divorce was finalized, I focused on rebuilding my life. I returned to my career, surrounded myself with supportive friends, and eventually met someone new, my now husband, Mark, who is 35. Mark has been a breath of fresh air in so many ways. He is everything Jake was not. He listens, communicates, and, most importantly, always looks out for me. We ended up dating for only a year because I became pregnant, and we rushed to get married. Let me tell you, I've had a much better experience with Mark in this short time than I ever did with Jake. Mark and I were overjoyed about my pregnancy. It meant so much more to me after everything I had endured with Jake and his family. Recently, while out shopping with Mark, I unexpectedly ran into Jake's parents at the mall. To recap, it had been 2 years since I last saw them, and I was visibly pregnant at the time. Their reaction was priceless. They were stunned, to say the least. They tried to be polite and make small talk, but I could see the shock on their faces. I'll admit that seeing their reactions made me feel vindicated. They had spent years torturing and discouraging me for being unable to conceive, yet here I was, pregnant and happy. I quickly said goodbye, eager to move on and focus on preparing for the baby. I had no desire to linger on the past. However, about a week after the mall incident, Jake began texting and calling me. At first, I ignored him, assuming his parents had informed him of my pregnancy and new marriage, and that he was just being nosy. But he didn't, a desperate man seeking help. I was taken aback by the sudden shift in his tone. It was as if he had flipped a switch overnight. Instead of the angry, accusatory messages I had been receiving, I was now getting heartfelt pleas. "Please, I need you to help me explain everything to my parents," he wrote. "They don't understand what's really going on. I can't lose them too." I was torn. Part of me felt a flicker of sympathy for him, but the larger part of me was still reeling from the way he had treated me and the humiliation I had endured at the hands of his family. I couldn't shake the memories of his mother's cruel comments and Jake's passive acceptance of them. Why should I help him now, after everything he had put me through? As the days went by, Jake's messages became more frantic. He started sending me long emails detailing his feelings of despair and regret. "I never meant for things to get this bad," he wrote. "I just wanted to make my parents happy. I thought if I could convince them that you were the problem, they would stop pressuring us." It was a strange mix of honesty and manipulation, and I found it hard to trust his intentions. Meanwhile, my husband, Mark, was growing increasingly concerned about Jake's behavior. He had been supportive throughout this entire ordeal, but even he was starting to feel the strain. "We need to take this seriously," he said one evening. "If he's willing to show up at our house, who knows what else he might do?" We discussed the possibility of getting a restraining order, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe that Jake would eventually back off, that he would come to terms with the situation and leave me alone. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Jake showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of a meeting when I received a frantic call from the receptionist. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice shaky. "It's Jake." My heart sank. I had made it clear to him that I didn't want to see him, and yet here he was, disregarding my boundaries once again. I quickly excused myself from the meeting and rushed to the front of the office. There he was, looking disheveled and desperate. "I just need to talk to you," he pleaded, his eyes wide with urgency. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I couldn't believe he had come to my workplace, where I was supposed to feel safe and secure. "Jake, you need to leave," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't the place for this. You can't just show up here unannounced." He looked hurt, but I could see the determination in his eyes. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," he insisted. "I just want to make things right." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "You need to respect my boundaries. I've moved on with my life, and I don't want to be dragged back into this." I turned to walk away, but he grabbed my arm gently. "Please, just hear me out. I'm not the same person I was before. I've realized how wrong I was." I pulled away from his grip, feeling a mix of anger and pity. "You had your chance, Jake. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with the consequences." With that, I walked back to my office, my heart racing. I could feel his eyes on me as I left, and I knew this wasn't over. That evening, I confided in Mark about what had happened. He was furious. "This is unacceptable," he said, pacing the living room. "We need to take action. I don't want you to feel unsafe." I agreed, and we decided to consult a lawyer about the possibility of a restraining order. It was a step I had hoped to avoid, but Jake's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and I couldn't ignore the potential danger. As we prepared to take legal action, I received another message from Jake. This time, it was different. "I'm sorry for everything," he wrote. "I know I've messed up, but I'm trying to change. I just want to talk to you one last time. Please." I stared at the screen, torn between the desire to respond and the knowledge that engaging with him would only lead to more heartache. In the end, I chose not to reply. I had to prioritize my own well-being and the life I was building with Mark. I couldn't let Jake's turmoil drag me back into a situation that had caused me so much pain. I was determined to move forward, to focus on. At this point, I was both perplexed and intrigued by Jake's latest requests. He was convinced that if I spoke with his parents and explained everything, they would reinstate him to his former financial status. He wanted me to go to them, clarify the misunderstandings, and somehow persuade them that he still deserved the inheritance they had planned to leave him. Initially, I thought it was a joke. There was no way he believed I would actually do that, right? But he was completely serious, acting as if I could simply wave a magic wand and fix everything for him. He even claimed that if I hadn't run into his parents, they would never have found out the truth, and he would be set for life. I couldn't believe the audacity of his words. It was astonishing that he didn't recognize that he had caused all of this by lying to them and treating me poorly for years. His lack of self-awareness was both strange and frightening. It takes a lot of ego to completely disavow responsibility for your own actions. I chose not to respond to any of his erratic texts, and as a result, he became increasingly desperate. Within days, his communication shifted from pleading to threatening. He sent messages like, "If you don't help me, I'll make sure everyone knows you're a liar, and you'll regret this." This was ridiculous. He was clearly spiraling and attempting to intimidate me into compliance. Unfortunately for him, I was no longer afraid of him. I had dealt with enough of his antics to know he was just blustering, and I refused to get embroiled in his family drama again. I tried to block all of his new phone numbers and accounts, but I had a nagging feeling that he wouldn't stop. He had already shown up at my place once, so what was stopping him from trying again? Mark and I discussed the possibility of getting a restraining order, but we were still weighing our options. I didn't want things to escalate further, but I also couldn't continue living in fear of Jake showing up out of nowhere with new demands or threats. If he came back and I refused to comply, would he harm me? He was clearly unstable, and I couldn't say for certain that he wouldn't. To make matters worse, I discovered that Jake's parents had been communicating with some mutual friends. Apparently, they now blamed me for the disintegration of their family. They believed I had influenced Jake to conceal the truth and that I was the reason they were cutting him off. I was at a loss for how to respond to that. Everyone in Jake's life seemed to be in complete denial about who he truly was, and I found myself caught in the center of their distorted reality. I did my best to ignore Jake's attempts to contact me, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could avoid the problem. I just wanted to focus on my pregnancy and my life with Mark, but Jake was making that impossible. He wasn't just trying to win back his parents, he was also attempting to drag me down with him, and I wouldn't allow that to happen. I hadn't decided what to do yet, but I was considering reaching out to his parents myself, not to help Jake, but to set the record straight once and for all. If they chose to blame me for their son's lies, that was their choice, but I wouldn't sit back and let them spread rumors about me. At the same time, I was concerned that any interaction with them would only exacerbate the situation. It felt like a lose-lose scenario. So, that's where things stood. Jake had gone from angry and blaming me to begging and threatening, and I had no idea what his next move would be. I just hoped he would realize that I wouldn't help him and back off before things spiraled out of control. I promised to keep everyone updated if anything else happened, but for now, I was focused on figuring out my next steps. Thank you for your continued support. I never anticipated this situation would escalate so quickly, but it was comforting to know I wasn't alone in dealing with it. I would update again if Jake did anything else, which, let's be honest, he most likely would. Hello everyone, I have some mixed news to share. The bad news is that this will be my final update. I know many of you have been invested in my story, and I'm grateful for all the support and concern for my safety and well-being. The good news is that I am finally free of Jake. After his latest round of begging and threatening, Mark and I had been discussing moving for a while, and with everything going on, we decided it was the right time to leave town and start fresh somewhere far away. We found a new apartment in a completely different state, packed up our belongings, and left without telling anyone where we were going. I was done with the drama. I needed to focus on myself.